Hey guys, it is finally time to begin our coverage of Big Brother Canada 11 by doing a power ranking for week 1. Now I know I didn't make a video last week as I normally do when I start new series. However, I did make a preseason power ranking on my Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description, where I did give my general impressions of these players. However, I just didn't have time to compile it into a full-length video. But now I'm going to be doing so, talking about what we know about the game so far, and ranking these players based on how likely I think they are to win, based on how they're doing so far in the game. But there are 16 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 16, we have someone that has already left the game, but here we have Amal. And Amal obviously walked not too long into the game, and we didn't really get to see her on the show at all, which is a bit of a shame as she was technically one of the bigger fans coming into it. Now, I, along with other people, were definitely low on her in the preseason, mainly due to her saying that she wouldn't want to build alliances, which is just really dumb to say. But really, we just don't know much about what she did inside the game, given that we didn't get a daily until after she had already left, and the show didn't really explain it super well. So until we get a better sense of what happened during her brief time in the house, it's hard to truly assess her game. But now that she's out of the game, I do have to leave her here at number 16. And with that, there are 15 players left in the game to talk about. And as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win, based on their current game position. And I'm recording this on Monday, March 13th, after the latest drop of the daily, so we know the veto results at this point. And obviously, the lack of feeds really makes it hard to assess where some of these people are within the game, but I'll do my best here. But at number 15, the player I believe is the least likely to win the game from this point on is John Michael, who is the target coming into this week. Now, obviously, he wasn't really in the majority at any point. Now, he did think early on that he had Zach in his corner, which led him to say out loud that he would have targeted a big guy had he won the first HOH. And through that, he became a backdoor target after Santino won HOH. And now that Ty has won the veto, it's very likely that he's going to use it. And through that, John Michael will be backdoored and more than likely evicted on Thursday. So it's really a shame to see him go out this way, especially considering he was one of the bigger fans coming into the season. And he was someone I was pretty excited to see. But the situation now looks pretty dire for him. So because of that, he is here at number 15. Now we're moving on to number 14, and I believe these next three players are players that I had the least read on based on the information we currently have. But at number 14, I did decide to go with Vanessa. Now, Vanessa is outside of the majority alliance, which is pretty bad. And I feel like outside of that, we don't really see much of her during this first week. Now, it's very possible that she could be playing more and we're just not seeing it. It's also possible that things could change that could give her more opportunities. But I feel like it's the lack of information, plus her not really being in the majority at the time being, it's not giving me too much confidence in her. So because of that, she is here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and we have another person that is currently on the outs, but I feel like we've seen a bit more of this person. But here we have Kuzi, and Kuzi was someone I was actually pretty high on in the preseason and was hoping good things out of her. But so far, she seems to be in a pretty rough spot, and sort of similar to Vanessa, she doesn't seem to have too many solid allies. However, I feel like compared to Vanessa, we have seen her a bit more on the feeds, and we have seen her talking with more people, so I feel like she's been playing a bit more actively because of that. But again, it's so early, and we just don't know that much about her game right now, so because of that, I do have to leave her here at number 13. Now we're moving on to number 12, and we have someone pretty similar in this vein, but here we have Dan Zabo. And I would actually argue that we have seen Dan Zabo even less than someone like a Kuzi, for example. And I think there's a debate that he's playing worse than Kuzi or Vanessa. Like the fact that he's not included in this core majority alliance, which consists primarily of these young, fit, athletic guys, I think speaks pretty poorly to the game that he's playing right now. Not to mention that he's currently on the block as a pawn, which isn't great either, although Ty has at least floated the idea of using the veto on him, so that's at least one pro I can give him. And plus, I feel like there's more potential for Dan to be included in this majority alliance, just simply due to who he is right now. Although there's certainly a debate that he could slide even further down the list, given like the fact that he wasn't already included on that. And plus, there's a potential for him to be a potential pawn in the future. Like, on the whole, I'm just not feeling that great about Dan right now, which is a big reason I have him here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and realistically, I don't have that much faith in this person, but they do have one major pro going for them. But here we have Anika, who is currently on the block as a pawn as well, although even then there was some discussion of her being taken out this week. However, I think the biggest pro I can give Anika is the fact that she has a good relationship with Ty, to the point where it seems like Ty is the most likely to use the veto on her. He even said that he was playing in the veto specifically to take her off, which I think the fact that Ty is willing to do that does show that she has at least one solid relationship in the house. However, even then, I'm just not feeling that great about Anika either. Like, sort of similar to these other people, she's not really in the core majority alliance, even though she seems to think she is. And in general, she's not someone I was high on in the preseason either. Like, the fact that she said that she was going to wing it and that she hasn't really seen much of the show doesn't give me much confidence in her overall ability, especially considering what's happening in the game right now. The fact that she doesn't realize what's happening and that this has happened before doesn't give me too much faith in her ability. So because of that, she is here, our number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have another person that I just don't feel that good about right now, and it's actually the current HOH, but here we have Santina. And Santina was someone I was also pretty low on in the preseason, but to her credit, she did win the first HOH, so at least she has some compability. However, even so, I don't think she's played it particularly well, where on one hand, she is kind of in the majority alliance, and she does seem to have a pretty good relationship with Zach, who is currently running the game. However, I feel like she has largely isolated herself from a lot of the house, to where she was very cagey with information during those first couple of days. She wasn't really offering information, while in turn she was just grilling people to get information from her, but not really exchanging information in return. So I feel like she hasn't built many solid relationships outside this core alliance, and it opens it up to where if Zach were to lose power, I feel like that would put Santina in a lot of danger, as it doesn't seem like Santina has really done much to build much bonds in the future. And even with this alliance that's been building, I feel like she's not really in the core of it either. I feel like it's largely just attached to her and is basically using her to do their dirty work for her. So I feel like to that end, Santina isn't even running the game herself, and she hasn't really built the power structure that is benefiting her. I feel like she's just being used by that majority alliance to do their dirty work. So because of that, I can't put Santina too high. I feel like she has not played this HOH particularly well, and because of that, she is here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have two players in a row that are in largely similar positions right now. It's just a matter of ordering them. But number 9, I did decide to go with the player that I have less confidence in the future, but here we have Renee. And Renee is kind of within the majority alliance, although it's more so of a side alliance with Rob alongside Shanae in that regard. And I feel like she doesn't seem to realize that she's not in the core. Like, while she is aligned with Rob, who is in a very solid position right now, and she probably will be safe in the coming weeks, I think she is overestimating her spot in the game, where she thinks that her, Rob, and Shania are the secret alliance that is dominating the game, when the reality is that Rob and these other guys, they are the core of the game, and they are just branching out to these other players and making them think that they have this secret deal going on, when in reality, they're not really in the core of it. And I think the fact that Renee doesn't realize this is a pretty big knock against her. And not to mention that she's technically on the block right now as the dead last nominee. I think that's not great on her end either. And it's a tough position to be in. And I don't think Renee right now is showing much capability of recognizing this and potentially moving out of it. I feel like she's probably going to try to ride with this for a while and maybe not recognize until it's too late that she is essentially screwed, per se. Now, it's still a spot where, again, if she does recognize that she's being played and is able to pull some numbers early enough, that they could change their position for the better. But right now, I'm just not having a ton of confidence in her, despite her better position than certain other players, which is why she's here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and we have a pretty similar player. However, I feel like they've been a bit more active in these early days. But here we have Shania. And Shania was someone that I was actually pretty high on the preseason. I know a lot of people were. And while she wasn't my winner pick, I feel like she was someone who definitely had more game knowledge than a lot of other people. However, so far, I feel like she's, again, been playing this more secondary role with Renee and Rob. Now, she has been a bit more active in recent days, like talking with Jonathan about building this secret 5-person alliance with them, Renee, Ty, and Zach. Although even then, this doesn't benefit her either. Again, she's in a similar trap to Renee, where she thinks she's running the game secretly, when in reality, it's these other players that are doing so. However, I feel like Shania does have a bit more potential to get out of this trap at some point, and I feel like she's been playing a bit more actively so far than Renee, and plus the fact that she's not on the block unlike Renee, which was enough to have her one spot higher. But realistically, I'm just not feeling that great about her. So because of that, she is here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and we have the last person that is technically outside of the core power structure. However, even then, he does have solid relationships with a lot of these players. But here we have Daniel, who was my winner pick coming into the season, mainly because he's, again, one of the bigger super fans coming into the game. However, right now, he's sort of in an interesting spot where, on one hand, he's technically not within the core majority group, and he's not really like a main affiliate to them either, sort of like a Renee or Shania. So you would think because of that he'd be a bit lower on the list because he's not within the core power structure. However, he has been shown building solid relationships with people like Zach, for instance. Again, building these relationships with people that are running the game while still having good bonds with the outsiders like Vanessa and Kuzi. I mean, he's looked on by people like Zach or Rob as someone that can win competitions for them, which probably isn't that great at the end of the day, like if he's using that to better serve them. However, he is also someone who, again, understands the game, and I feel like he has more potential to potentially shake things up in the future and at least recognize what's going on compared to these other players. So I am factoring in my preseason thoughts on them to a degree here, but it's also the fact that they've been shown a bit more in terms of building relationships to where I did decide to bump them up to a degree, though again, they're still technically not in the core majority alliance, so because of that, he is here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have a bit of an interesting case to talk about, but here we have Claudia, and I'm sure some people will say this person is too high. However, I think Claudia has some pros for her. I think namely it's her relationship with Ty, which is sort of evolving into a showmance, and I think normally I would have her lower because she is inclined to do that. However, I feel like that's also something that could benefit her in the future to where if Ty decides to flip the game, then Claudia would probably be a part of that to a degree. And I think Claudia has been a bit more cognizant of her spot within the game compared to people like a Renee or a Shania. And I think she is a bit more willing to potentially play more in the future in that regard. There's also the element of her winning safety due to her being from Prince Edward's Island, which is pretty interesting. So I feel like Claudia is in an interesting spot right now. Now, granted, I think there's also the risk that she could just not understand the game super well and potentially be targeted, or just her being in a showmance could be an easy target because of that as well. But it's the fact that she's at least in a more solid spot in the alliance right now, or at least with Ty per se. And then there is this potential that she could be along for the ride in the future if things were to shake up. That I did decide to have her a bit higher than these other players. Though realistically, I feel like she's not as likely to move up in the future. So because of that, she is here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and in case you couldn't tell, it is the 5 guys that comprise the core majority alliance right now, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But at number 5, I did decide to go with the person that has been kind of on the outs of that to a degree, but here we have Hope. And Hope has definitely had a weird week so far, where despite him coming off as pretty calm and collected in his preseason material, so far he has come off as mainly paranoid, and it's gotten to the point where a lot of the guys have been needing to give him pep talks and stuff. Now, granted, it hasn't gone to the point where they're getting annoyed by him. I feel like he's still pretty solidly within that group, which is the big reason I have him this high. However, he has definitely surprised a lot of people with how, insecure he's been in the game so far, and I can't really have him too much higher because of that. And plus, I feel like his positioning, beyond the core group, isn't as solid. So because of that, he is here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have another pretty weird pick, all things considered. And I'm sure some people would want this person to be number 1 or number 2. And I know a lot of other people just don't like this person. But it's a combination of their current game position that leads them this high on the list. But here we have Zach. And you could argue that Zach is actually a bit too low here, as if we are just looking at the state of the house right now, he is technically running the game. He is the center of the core majority group, and he is the one who has been the most effective at getting a lot of what's happened this week to happen. He is the one that has built the relationship with Santina and has basically influenced Santina to the point where he's basically controlling her HOH. He's the one that got her to put the target onto John Michael and to go along with the John Michael backdoor, even though Santina herself wasn't that opposed to John Michael early on. I mean, he was even her partner during the first competition, and yet here Zach is trying to get her to backdoor John Michael and will be pretty successful in that regard. He's also been the one to really formulate this core majority group as well. He's been the one who's been trying to unify them to a large degree. And through that, he probably should be number one based purely off what's been happening in the game so far. However, the reason that I don't is I feel like people are already picking up on his game. I mean, there's already been talks about how he is the one who has been running around and really controlling things, to the point where if someone in the outs were to win the HOH in the future, then he could very easily be targeted because of that. And even people within his own alliance have already started to recognize that he is technically the one controlling the game. And there is some talks that even they could go along with such a move in the future, depending on how things go. I feel like Zach is someone who, despite him being in a stall position, is someone that could just be in it for the short term, and I just don't have a lot of faith that he'll be able to maintain that control in the long term. However, it's the fact that he is at least shown to be running the game for the time being that I can't entirely ignore that, and because of that, he is here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have a very interesting person to talk about as well, but here we have Ty. And Ty has played an interesting game so far where, again, he is part of this core majority group. He's also built a Showmance with Claudia, and he has been building some solid inroads as well. However, one key storyline that's been happening this past week is his rivalry with Rob. He recognizes that Rob has been building a closer bond with Renee and Shania, and so far at least it seems like Rob hasn't really picked up that Ty is out to get him, so that's something at least. And he's also built solid relationships as well with Anika, for example, to where he won the veto specifically to use it on Anika, which is pretty good as well. I feel like Ty is someone who definitely has a lot in him to do well in the future, and I feel like he has more longevity compared to a Zach, who I could very easily see being targeted in the future. However, the reason I don't have him higher is I feel like he is someone that could potentially overplay in the future, like namely if he decides to take an early shot at Rob, for example, or possibly even a Zach. And I could also see a Showmance with Claudia eventually becoming an issue as well. Although even then, I feel like it's more likely that Claudia would go home over him as well. So I feel like Ty is someone who definitely has a lot of potential in the future, just based on how the game is shaking out. However, I feel like the top 2 players are players that I have a bit more confidence in, which is why I had to leave Ty here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and we have a player that I know hasn't been as active so far in the game. However, I feel like naturally he's just in a pretty solid spot. But here we have Jonathan. And again, Jonathan is playing largely how I expected him to, where he's just pretty naturally likable for the most part. Now, sort of similar to people like Ty and Rob, he has built solid relationships with a lot of the women as well, to where he has some allies there. He's even been talked about being included in this 5-person alliance as well with Renee and Shania. So I feel like Jonathan is pretty naturally likable, to where he's probably going to get deep into the game because of that. And I feel like no one's really talked as much about Jonathan as well, which is another big boon for him. That mixing it with his competition ability, or at least perceived competition ability. And I think Jonathan should be pretty set for at least the pre-jury set phase of the game, unless something goes really wrong for him. But I feel like compared to the number 1 person, he hasn't been playing quite as actively, which is why I had to leave him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the player I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother Canada right now is Rob. Now, I'll get it out of our way. The main knock against Rob is the fact that Ty is picking up on his game to a degree. Now, I don't think Ty is going to take a direct shot anytime soon, and I feel like even if he does, I think Rob probably has more tools at his disposal to allow him to stay in the game over Ty or whoever he puts up alongside him. However, I feel like the reason I have to put Rob at number 1 is he is in the best position in the house right now, where he has a very close relationship with Renee and Shania, to the point where they think that they're the secret alliance running the game right now, while also being a pretty integral member within the core majority alliance. I feel like Rob is also someone who is pretty well liked to where he has pretty good relationships with people outside the alliance as well. He also, similar to these other guys, has plenty of compatibility that could allow him to get out of tricky situations. And I feel like despite the whole tie situation, I feel like Rob is still less likely to be targeted than someone like a Zach in the future. Where despite Zach being the one to run the game, I assume that Rob is in the naturally best position, just given his allies and given his current threat management for the most part. So I think because of that, Rob is someone who I definitely have the most confidence in to remain in a good position for the long term. And he is also someone that has been playing a bit more actively than a Jonathan, to where I feel like Rob is someone who is set up pretty well so far. And I feel like he's been doing more to ensure that he's in this solid position through his relationships with Renee and Shania, which is why I do have him here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps out with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so stay tuned for that. Australian Survivor is still ongoing, so you can expect weekly power rankings for that. Same thing with Survivor 44, which I am also covering. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to join in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that's the video. See ya.